Hello there, and welcome back to Restful Realities. Tonight, we're embarking on a gentle journey northward, across one of the most remarkable nations on Earth. As you settle into your blankets and let the day's tensions melt away, we'll explore the vast and varied land of Canada, a country where ancient forests whisper secrets of millennia past, where northern lights dance across endless skies, and where the quiet strength of nature reminds us of something greater than ourselves. If your eyes grow heavy as we wander through this exploration, that's perfectly natural. Feel free to drift off whenever sleep calls to you. There's no need to stay awake for every word. Let this be a companion to your rest, a soft voice in the darkness as your mind begins its nightly voyage toward dreams. Before we begin our deeper exploration, let's touch upon something current, something that connects Canada to the wider world in this moment. As we enter the year 2026, Canada finds itself at a fascinating crossroads. Recent months have seen significant shifts in travel patterns, with Canadian airlines adjusting their routes as travelers increasingly look beyond traditional destinations. Flights to the United States have decreased notably, while connections to the Caribbean, South America, and Europe have expanded. This reflects not just changing preferences, but the adaptive spirit that has always defined this northern nation. Meanwhile, the Canadian economy continues its careful navigation through global uncertainties, with discussions about trade agreements and economic partnerships taking center stage. These are the quiet currents of change that flow beneath the surface of daily life, shaping the country's future, even as its essential character remains unchanged. But tonight, we're not here to dwell on headlines. We're here to discover what makes Canada truly remarkable, to understand the timeless qualities that define this land. So let your breathing slow, allow your muscles to relax, and join me as we begin our exploration. Canada is vast. This simple word hardly captures the reality, but it's where we must start. As the second largest country in the world by total area, Canada spans nearly 10 million square kilometers. Only Russia exceeds it in sheer size. To put this in perspective, if you were to walk from Canada's eastern shore to its western boundary, you would traverse more than 5,000 kilometers, crossing through 6 different time zones. The country stretches so far north that portions of it lie within the Arctic Circle, where the sun refuses to set during summer months and refuses to rise during the depths of winter. The coastline tells its own story of magnitude. Canada possesses the longest coastline of any nation on Earth, measuring over 243,000 kilometers. This includes the shores of 52,455 islands, each one a small world unto itself. The sea has shaped much of Canadian history, from the arrival of the first peoples across ancient land bridges to the establishment of fishing communities that have endured for centuries. If someone were to walk this entire coastline at a pace of 20 kilometers per day, the journey would consume 33 years. It's a measurement that exists more in imagination than reality, a number too large to truly comprehend. Yet it speaks to the profound relationship between this nation and the waters that surround it. Within Canada's borders lies something equally impressive. Water, vast quantities of it, held in more than 2 million lakes. Of these, 563 exceed 100 square kilometers in size. This represents more lakes than any other country on Earth, and these bodies of water contain approximately 20% of all the fresh water on the planet. The Great Lakes, shared with the United States, form the largest group of freshwater lakes in the world by surface area. But Canada claims many others entirely within its borders. Great Bear Lake in the Northwest Territories, Great Slave Lake, Lake Winnipeg. These are inland seas in their own right, their waters cold and clear, supporting ecosystems that have evolved over thousands of years. The landscape itself defies simple description. In the west, the Rocky Mountains rise like a stone fortress, their peaks perpetually crowned with snow and ice. Mount Logan, Canada's highest point, reaches 5,959 meters into the sky, a giant among giants in the St. Elias Mountains. These western ranges create a dramatic backdrop for the province of British Columbia, where temperate rainforests carpet the coastal regions. Fed by moisture-laden winds from the Pacific Ocean, moving eastward, the land transforms. The Canadian Shield, one of the oldest geological formations on Earth, forms a vast U-shape around Hudson Bay. This ancient expanse of exposed, Precambrian rock covers approximately half of Canada's total land area. In an area known as the Nouveau-Rideau Greenstone Belt on the eastern shore of Hudson Bay in northern Quebec, geologists have studied rocks that some researchers suggest could be among the oldest on Earth's surface. The site was first recognized in 2001, and subsequent analysis has proposed ages ranging from 3.8 to 4.28 billion years. Though these determinations remain a subject of ongoing scientific discussion, research published in 2025 suggests a minimum age of at least 4.16 billion years for some formations in this area. If these ancient ages are confirmed, these rocks would date from a time when Earth was still forming its earliest crust. The Shield is characterized by its thin soil cover, countless lakes carved by glaciers, and endless stretches of boreal forest. This is not land suited for intensive agriculture, yet it holds immense mineral wealth. Diamonds, emeralds, copper, and gold lie hidden beneath its rocky surface, earning it the nickname, the Mineral House. Between the Shield and the Rocky Mountains stretch the prairies, Canada's agricultural heartland. These are the interior plains, vast expanses of relatively flat or gently rolling terrain that extend from the United States border northward. The provinces of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba contain most of these grasslands. Here, the soil is deep and fertile, perfect for growing wheat, canola, and other crops that feed not just Canada, but much of the world. The sky in these regions seems impossibly large, an endless dome of blue stretching from horizon to horizon, interrupted only by the occasional farmhouse or grain elevator standing as sentinels over the fields. In the far north, the Canadian Arctic encompasses territories few people will ever visit. The Arctic Archipelago, a collection of islands in the Arctic Ocean, represents some of the most remote and inhospitable terrain on the planet. Ellesmere Island, the northernmost of Canada's Arctic islands, is a land of glaciers and mountains, where summer temperatures rarely exceed 10 degrees Celsius and winter cold plunges below -40. Cape Columbia on Ellesmere Island marks the northernmost point of Canadian land, sitting at 83 degrees north latitude, only 769 kilometers from the North Pole. Standing there in winter, one would experience 24 hours of darkness, the sun never cresting the horizon for months at a time. Yet even here, life persists. The territory of Nunavut, created in 1999, is the largest and newest of Canada's territories, comprising 1/5 of the country's total land area. This makes Nunavut larger than Mexico, yet despite this enormous size, only about 38,000 people call it home, giving it one of the lowest population densities on Earth. Most residents are Inuit, and the territory represents the largest land claim settlement in Canadian history, returning control of traditional territories to indigenous peoples. The capital, Iqaluit, sits on Baffin Island, accessible only by air or, briefly in summer, by sea. There are no roads connecting Nunavut's communities to the rest of Canada. Each settlement is an island unto itself, linked to the outside world only by aircraft and increasingly by internet connections. The territory experiences extremes unknown in southern Canada. In winter, temperatures can drop to -50 degrees Celsius or lower, cold enough that exposed skin freezes in minutes. The sea ice that surrounds the islands can be several meters thick, solid enough to support the weight of trucks, and heavy equipment. Indigenous hunters travel across this frozen ocean on snowmobiles, searching for seals and other game, using skills passed down through countless generations. In summer, the transformation is remarkable. The tundra explodes with color as low-growing plants rush to bloom during the brief warm period. Caribou migrate in vast herds, and millions of birds arrive from southern wintering grounds to nest and raise their young in this land of endless daylight. The Canadian Shield, that vast expanse of ancient rock surrounding Hudson Bay, tells its own story of deep time. This is some of the oldest exposed rock on Earth's surface, remnants of the planet's earliest crust. 4 billion years ago, when Earth was still young and the atmosphere contained little oxygen, these rocks were forming deep beneath the surface. The violent geological processes of the young planet pushed them upward, and glaciers ground away the overlying layers, exposing this ancient foundation. Standing on the shield, one is standing on rocks that existed before most life on Earth, before the continents assumed their current shapes, before the very air we breathe had been created by photosynthesizing organisms. The glaciers that carved the shield into its current form only retreated about 10,000 years ago, leaving behind a landscape of lakes, rivers, and rocky outcrops. The soil here is thin, scraped away by kilometer-thick sheets of ice that covered the region during the last ice age. This thin soil cannot support intensive agriculture, but it nurtures vast boreal forests. These northern forests stretch across Canada in a band thousands of kilometers wide, from the Alaska border in the west to Newfoundland in the east. They represent one of Earth's largest forest ecosystems, a critical carbon sink that helps regulate global climate. The forest, too, deserves its place in this geographical portrait. Approximately 42% of Canada's land is covered by forests, representing about 8% of the world's total forested area. These are predominantly boreal forests, composed mainly of spruce, poplar, and pine. They stretch in an enormous band across the northern portions of the provinces and territories, a wilderness so extensive that in many places, humans have never set foot. These forests are not just collections of trees. They are ecosystems of staggering complexity, home to countless species of plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms, all interconnected in ways science is only beginning to understand. Within these diverse landscapes dwells an equally diverse array of creatures. Canada's wildlife has become emblematic of wilderness itself, symbols of nature's endurance in an increasingly developed world. Let's begin with one of the most iconic, the polar bear. Canada is home to approximately 16,000 polar bears, representing roughly 2/3 of the world's entire population of these magnificent animals. Of the 19 recognized polar bear subpopulations globally, 13 are managed wholly or in part by Canada. The town of Churchill in Manitoba has earned the designation Polar Bear Capital of the World because every October and November, large numbers of bears gather just outside town, waiting for Hudson Bay to freeze so they can return to hunting seals on the ice. These bears are remarkable creatures, supremely adapted to their Arctic environment. An adult male can weigh between 300 and 800 kilograms, making the polar bear the largest land carnivore on Earth. Their fur appears white, but this is an optical illusion. Each hair is actually transparent and hollow, allowing it to reflect light while also trapping heat. Beneath this fur lies black skin, and beneath the skin, a layer of fat up to 4.5 inches thick. This combination of insulation is so effective that polar bears often overheat when active, even in temperatures far below freezing. The bear's large paws, up to 30 centimeters across, function as snowshoes, distributing their weight across thin ice and snow. In water, these same paws become powerful paddles. Polar bears are exceptional swimmers. The longest recorded swimming distance for a polar bear is 687 kilometers, accomplished over 9 consecutive days. They can swim at speeds of up to 10 kilometers per hour, and they've been observed swimming in open water more than 100 kilometers from the nearest ice or shore. Yet despite their power and adaptability, polar bears face an uncertain future. Their lives are inextricably linked to sea ice, the platform from which they hunt ringed seals, their primary food source. As global temperatures rise and Arctic ice diminishes, the bears are forced to spend more time on land, where food is scarce and encounters with humans become more frequent. The bears of western Hudson Bay are spending approximately 3 more weeks on shore now than they did just 3 decades ago, a change that has measurable impacts on their body condition and reproductive success. Beyond the polar bear, Canada's wilderness supports a remarkable diversity of other species. The boreal forests are home to moose, the largest member of the deer family, with males sporting antlers that can span more than 1.8 meters. An adult bull moose can weigh up to 700 kilograms, yet despite their size, they move through forests with surprising stealth. Moose are solitary animals, spending most of their time alone, except during the brief mating season in autumn. They're adapted to deep snow and cold temperatures, with long legs that allow them to wade through drifts that would immobilize other animals. In summer, moose often stand in ponds and lakes, feeding on aquatic vegetation and cooling themselves, as their dark coats and large bodies make them prone to overheating. Black bears, smaller cousins to the polar bears and grizzlies, number in the hundreds of thousands across the country. Despite their name, black bears can also be brown, cinnamon, or even blonde in color. They're omnivores, eating everything from berries and roots to fish and small mammals. In fall, they enter a state called hyperphagia, eating almost constantly to build up fat reserves for winter hibernation. A black bear may consume 20,000 calories per day during this period, gaining several pounds daily. When winter comes, they retreat to dens, their heart rates and metabolism slowing dramatically as they enter a deep sleep that will last until spring. Grizzly bears, larger and more aggressive than their black bear cousins, inhabit Western Canada, particularly in British Columbia, Alberta, and the Northern Territories. An adult male grizzly can weigh up to 360 kilograms and stand 2.4 meters tall on its hind legs. These bears are apex predators with few natural enemies apart from humans. They're particularly fond of salmon, and during the autumn salmon runs, grizzlies gather at rivers in impressive numbers, each bear catching dozens of fish per day. The nutrients from these salmon, dragged into the forest and consumed, fertilize the trees, creating a direct link between the ocean and the forest ecosystem. Wolves, lynx, and wolverines prowl the northern forests. Wolves live and hunt in packs, their howls echoing across the wilderness as they communicate with pack members or warn off rival groups. A wolf pack typically consists of a breeding pair and their offspring from several years, all working together to bring down prey much larger than themselves. Caribou, elk, and moose all fall to coordinated wolf attacks. The lynx, a medium-sized wildcat with distinctive ear tufts and large paws that act like snowshoes, specializes in hunting snowshoe hares. The population cycles of lynx and hares are closely linked, with lynx numbers rising and falling a year or two behind hare populations in a natural predator-prey oscillation that has been documented for decades. The wolverine, despite being part of the weasel family and weighing only 15 to 30 kilograms, has a reputation for ferocity that exceeds its size. These powerful predators have been known to drive bears and cougars from their kills. They possess tremendous strength, capable of taking down prey several times their size, and their thick fur and low surface area to volume ratio allow them to survive in extremely cold environments. In the Arctic tundra, herds of caribou migrate across vast distances, following ancient routes that predate human presence in North America. The porcupine caribou herd, which travels between Alaska and Yukon, covers more than 3,000 kilometers annually, one of the longest mammal migrations on Earth. These migrations are timed to take advantage of the brief Arctic summer, when the tundra briefly becomes a landscape of plenty, with nutritious vegetation and relatively few predators. Caribou are remarkably adapted to the cold, with hollow hairs that provide excellent insulation and wide, spreading hooves that support them on snow and boggy tundra alike. Musk oxen, with their thick coats and prehistoric appearance, graze in small groups across the northern territories. These animals have been largely unchanged for thousands of years, perfectly adapted to the harsh Arctic climate. Their civet, the soft underwool beneath their coarse outer hair, is one of the warmest natural fibers known, 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. When threatened by wolves, musk oxen form a defensive circle with adults on the outside and young in the center, their massive horned heads facing outward, a defense strategy that worked well against natural predators but made them vulnerable to human hunters with rifles, leading to their near extinction in Canada before protective measures allowed populations to recover. The country's waters teem with life as well. The Atlantic and Pacific coasts support populations of whales, including humpbacks, orcas, and the endangered North Atlantic right whale. Salmon return to their birth rivers each year in massive runs that have sustained both ecosystems and human communities for thousands of years. In the countless lakes and rivers of the interior, pike, walleye, and lake trout glide through cold, clear waters. Bird life in Canada is equally spectacular. In summer, millions of waterfowl and shorebirds nest across the country's wetlands and tundra. The boreal forest alone supports billions of songbirds during the breeding season. The tundra becomes home to species like the snowy owl and the ptarmigan, both perfectly adapted to life in the harsh northern climate. Along the coasts, puffins, murres, and other seabirds nest on rocky cliffs in colonies numbering in the thousands. The beaver, Canada's national animal, deserves special mention. These industrious rodents have played an enormous role in shaping both the land and the nation's history. Their dams can create wetlands covering hundreds of acres, transforming landscapes and creating habitat for countless other species. The fur trade, driven by European demand for beaver pelts, was one of the primary forces behind the early exploration and colonization of Canada. The beaver's image appears on the Canadian 5-cent coin and remains a symbol of Canadian industry and resourcefulness. Perhaps one of Canada's most spectacular natural phenomena is not an animal at all, but a display of light. The aurora borealis, or northern lights, illuminate the night sky across much of northern Canada, particularly in the territories. These ethereal curtains of green, red, and purple light are caused by charged particles from the sun colliding with gases in Earth's atmosphere. The town of Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories calls itself the Aurora Capital of North America due to its position beneath the auroral oval and its relatively clear skies. Watching the aurora dance across the Arctic sky is an experience that leaves viewers in awe, a reminder of the forces at work beyond our small planet. Long before European ships appeared on the horizon, long before the name Canada was even conceived, people lived on this land. The archaeological and genetic evidence suggests that humans first arrived in North America at least 15,000 years ago, possibly much earlier, crossing from Siberia via a land bridge that once connected Asia and Alaska during the last ice age. These first arrivals eventually spread throughout the continent, giving rise to hundreds of distinct cultures, languages, and nations. In what is now Canada, Indigenous peoples developed sophisticated societies adapted to the varied environments they inhabited. In the Pacific Northwest, nations like the Haida, Tlingit, and Coast Salish built impressive villages of cedar plank houses, carved monumental totem poles, and developed complex social hierarchies. They relied heavily on salmon, which they caught in enormous quantities and preserved for winter. Their art, characterized by its distinctive form lines and stylized animal representations, is now recognized worldwide as one of humanity's great artistic traditions. On the plains, nations including the Blackfoot, Cree, and Assiniboine followed the buffalo herds, developing a nomadic lifestyle centered on this animal that provided food, clothing, shelter, and tools. The introduction of horses by Europeans in the 17th century revolutionized plains culture, enabling more efficient hunting and warfare. Prior to this, sophisticated hunting techniques involving buffalo jumps, where herds were stampeded over cliffs, demonstrated their intimate knowledge of animal behavior. In the subarctic forests, peoples such as the Dean and Algonquin developed strategies for surviving in one of Earth's harshest environments. They hunted caribou, moose, and smaller game, fished the lakes and rivers, and gathered berries and other plant foods during the brief summer. Their clothing, made from animal hides and fur, was so well designed for the cold that it influenced the gear of later European explorers and trappers. The Iroquois Confederacy, also known as the Haudenosaunee, or people of the Longhouse, inhabited the region south of the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River. This confederacy, which included the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations, later joined by the Tuscarora, formed one of the world's oldest participatory democracies. Their system of government, with its emphasis on consensus and representation, would later influence European Enlightenment thinkers. In the Arctic, the Inuit developed a way of life exquisitely adapted to the extreme cold and long winters. Their traditional knowledge of ice conditions, weather patterns, animal behavior, and survival techniques represents thousands of years of accumulated wisdom. They invented technologies like the kayak and the igloo, hunted seals through breathing holes in the ice, and navigated vast distances across seemingly featureless expanses of snow and ice using subtle environmental cues. It's estimated that at the time of first European contact, approximately 200,000 indigenous people lived in what is now Canada, speaking more than 60 distinct languages belonging to 11 major language families. Each nation had its own creation stories, spiritual beliefs, governance systems, and cultural practices. They were not a monolithic group, but a diverse collection of peoples with their own identities and histories. The Beothuk people of Newfoundland represent one of the tragedies of contact. These people, who painted their bodies and possessions with red ochre, had inhabited the island for thousands of years. European settlement and the resulting conflicts, combined with the disruption of their traditional way of life and exposure to disease, led to their extinction as a distinct people. The last known Beothuk, Shanna Defeat, died in 1829. Her story represents the fate that befell too many indigenous nations, communities and cultures erased by the arrival of Europeans. The Micmac people of the Maritimes were among the first indigenous peoples to encounter European fishermen and later settlers. They developed a particularly close relationship with the French. Many converted to Catholicism while maintaining many of their traditional practices, creating a unique synthesis. The Micmac were skilled canoe builders and navigators, intimately familiar with the waters and islands of their territory. They had a sophisticated understanding of the yearly cycles of fish and game, moving seasonally to take advantage of resources as they became available. In the interior, the Cree Nation, one of the largest indigenous groups in Canada, occupied vast territories from Alberta to Quebec. The Cree were divided into several regional groups: Plains Cree, Woods Cree, and Swampy Cree, each adapted to their specific environment. They were central to the fur trade, acting as intermediaries between European traders and other indigenous nations. Some Cree groups adopted syllabic writing systems developed by missionaries in the 19th century, and these writing systems are still used today. appearing on signs and documents throughout Cree territories. The Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples of the Pacific Northwest coast developed some of the most complex and stratified societies in pre-contact North America. These nations were not nomadic, but lived in permanent villages. Their wealth derived not from agriculture, but from the extraordinarily productive waters of the Pacific. Salmon runs were so abundant that they could be preserved in quantities sufficient to feed communities through the winter. This stability allowed the development of elaborate art traditions, social hierarchies, and ceremonial practices. The potlatch ceremony, a complex event involving the distribution of gifts and the display of wealth and status, was central to Northwest Coast culture. The Canadian government banned potlatches in 1885, considering them wasteful and an impediment to Indigenous peoples' assimilation. This ban remained in effect until 1951, representing just one of many attempts to suppress Indigenous cultures. The arrival of Europeans brought catastrophic changes. Diseases like smallpox, measles, and tuberculosis, against which Indigenous peoples had no immunity, swept through communities, sometimes killing 50 to 90% of the population in affected areas. These epidemics disrupted social structures, caused immense suffering, and dramatically weakened Indigenous societies even before significant European settlement occurred. The subsequent centuries brought continued pressure. Treaties were signed, often with terms that were unclear or that were not honored by the colonial government. The Indian Act, implemented in 1876, sought to control nearly every aspect of Indigenous life, from governance to cultural practices. Perhaps most devastating was the residential school system, which operated from the 1870s until the closure of the last school in 1996. These schools, run by churches and funded by the government, forcibly separated Indigenous children from their families and communities with the explicit goal of taking the Indian out of the child. The trauma inflicted by these institutions, including widespread physical and sexual abuse, continues to reverberate through Indigenous communities today. Despite these profound injustices, Indigenous peoples have persisted and, in recent decades, have experienced a cultural renaissance. Land claims and self-government agreements have returned some measure of autonomy to many nations. Traditional languages, while endangered, are being revitalized through education programs. Indigenous art, music, and literature are gaining wider recognition. The creation of Nunavut in 1999 gave the Inuit a territory with a degree of self-governance. In 2021, Canada marked its first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, a federal statutory holiday dedicated to honoring the children who died in residential schools and the survivors, their families, and communities. Today, more than 1.8 million Canadians identify as Indigenous, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. They represent a vital and growing portion of Canada's population, with contributions to every aspect of Canadian society, while also working to preserve and revitalize their distinct cultures and languages. The first confirmed European contact with what would become Canada occurred around the year 1000, when Norse explorers from Greenland established a small settlement at Lanzo Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. This outpost, the first known European presence in the Americas, was short-lived, and knowledge of it faded from European consciousness until archaeologists rediscovered the site in the 1960s. 5 centuries would pass before Europeans returned in earnest. In 1497, John Cabot, an Italian explorer sailing under the English flag, reached the shores of Newfoundland and claimed the land for England. This voyage opened the door to the rich fishing grounds of the Grand Banks, which attracted Basque, Portuguese, French, and English fishermen throughout the 16th century. These seasonal visitors traded with Indigenous peoples, exchanging European manufactured goods for furs, establishing the foundations of what would become the fur trade. In 1534, French explorer Jacques Cartier entered the Gulf of St. Lawrence and, during subsequent voyages, sailed up the St. Lawrence River as far as present-day Montreal. He heard the Iroquoian word, Canada, meaning village or settlement, and began using Canada to refer to the area. The name would eventually be applied to the entire colony and later the country. The French established the first permanent European settlement in Canada at Port Royal in Acadia, what is now Nova Scotia, in 1604. 4 years later, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City, which became the capital of New France. The French colony grew slowly, hampered by harsh winters, conflicts with indigenous nations, and lack of support from France, which was more focused on other colonial ventures. New France was never heavily populated compared to the English colonies to the south, while the French colonies in what would become the United States attracted hundreds of thousands of settlers. New France's population remained small, reaching only about 70,000 by the time of British conquest in 1763. This small population was spread thinly across a vast territory, with settlements clustered along the St. Lawrence River in scattered outposts, stretching west to the Great Lakes and south down the Mississippi River. The French colonies' economy rested primarily on the fur trade. French voyageurs and coureurs de bois established relationships with indigenous peoples, learning their languages and ways, often taking indigenous wives. These unions gave rise to the Métis people, a distinct indigenous group with mixed French and indigenous heritage. The Métis developed their own language, Michif, and culture, playing a crucial role in the fur trade as guides, interpreters, and traders. Meanwhile, the English established the Hudson's Bay Company in 1670, granted a charter giving it monopoly rights over the vast watershed draining into Hudson Bay. This territory, called Rupert's Land, encompassed much of present-day northern and western Canada. The company established trading posts throughout this region, competing with the French and later with the Montreal-based Northwest Company. The rivalry between Britain and France in North America culminated in the 7 Years' War, a global conflict that reached the colonies. The pivotal battle occurred in 1759 on the Plains of Abraham outside Quebec City. British forces under General James Wolfe defeated the French army commanded by the Marquis de Montcalm. Both commanders died in the battle, which has since taken on almost mythic significance in Canadian history. The French colony fell, and in 1763, the Treaty of Paris officially ceded New France to Britain. British rule brought new challenges. The Quebec Act of 1774 attempted to accommodate the French-speaking Roman Catholic population by allowing them to maintain French civil law and freely practice their religion, at a time when Catholics faced restrictions in Britain itself. This relative tolerance helped maintain peace in Quebec, even as revolution erupted in the American colonies to the south. The American Revolution had profound impacts on Canada. Loyalists, people who wished to remain British subjects, fled north in tens of thousands, settling in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and what is now Ontario. These loyalists included people of diverse backgrounds: Dutch, German, British, Scandinavian, and even African descent, including 3,000 freed or escaped slaves seeking refuge in British territory. Their arrival fundamentally changed the demographics of British North America. The Constitutional Act of 1791 divided the colony of Quebec into Upper Canada, largely English-speaking and Protestant, and Lower Canada, predominantly French-speaking and Catholic. This division acknowledged the distinct character of the two populations, while also sowing seeds of future conflicts. The early 19th century brought more challenges. In 1812, the United States declared war on Britain, partly hoping to conquer Canada, while Britain was preoccupied fighting Napoleon in Europe. The war featured numerous American invasions of Canadian territory, all of which were repelled by a combination of British regular troops Canadian militia, and indigenous allies. The war solidified a distinct Canadian identity, one defined partly in opposition to American republicanism. By the mid-19th century, the scattered British colonies in North America faced pressures that would lead them toward union. Railways were connecting disparate regions, and there was growing sentiment that a larger political entity would be stronger economically and militarily. Representatives from the colonies met in a series of conferences, ultimately agreeing to form a confederation. On July 1st, 1867, the British North America Act created the Dominion of Canada, uniting the colonies of Canada, divided into Ontario and Quebec, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick into a single federation. This was not full independence. The British government retained control over foreign policy, and British law was still supreme, but it was a significant step toward nationhood. Over the following decades, other territories and colonies would join: Manitoba in 1870, British Columbia in 1871, Prince Edward Island in 1873, and eventually Alberta and Saskatchewan in 1905. Newfoundland remained separate until 1949, when it became Canada's 10th province. If one were to ask people around the world to name something distinctly Canadian, maple syrup would likely top the list. This is not mere stereotype, but reflects a deep truth about Canada's identity and economy. Canada produces approximately 75 to 80% of the world's maple syrup, with the province of Quebec responsible for 92% of Canadian production. The production of maple syrup has ancient roots. Indigenous peoples in eastern North America discovered that maple tree sap, collected in late winter and early spring, could be boiled down to create a sweet syrup and eventually crystallized into sugar. Various legends describe this discovery. One Ojibwe story tells of a chief who, throwing his tomahawk into a maple tree before going hunting, returned to find sap dripping from the wound. His wife used the sap to cook meat, discovering its sweet properties. Indigenous peoples developed sophisticated methods for collecting and processing maple sap. They would cut V-shaped incisions in maple tree bark, inserting wooden or reed spouts to direct the flowing sap into birch bark containers. To concentrate the sap into syrup, they would drop hot stones into wooden vessels, or they would allow the sap to freeze overnight and remove the ice, which contained little sugar, thereby concentrating what remained. European colonists learned these techniques from indigenous peoples and refined them. Metal spouts replaced reeds, metal pots allowed for more efficient boiling, and eventually, elaborate systems of tubes and vacuum-powered collection replaced the old bucket-hanging method on larger operations. Modern maple syrup production is now a sophisticated industry, but the basic process remains the same. Tap trees in late winter or early spring, when daytime temperatures rise above freezing, but nights remain cold. Collect the sap and boil it down until it reaches the correct sugar concentration. The scale of this boiling is impressive. It takes approximately 40 gallons of sap to produce 1 gallon of maple syrup. This means that to make even a modest amount of syrup, one must process enormous volumes of sap. The boiling houses, called sugar shacks or cabanes à sucre in Quebec, fill with sweet-smelling steam during the sugaring season, which typically runs from March through April. Quebec's dominance in maple syrup production is due to its ideal climate and geography. The province contains vast forests of sugar maple trees, and its weather patterns, with cold winters and warm springs, create perfect conditions for sap flow. The industry employs more than 10,000 people in Quebec alone and generates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue annually. The maple leaf itself has been a symbol of Canada since the 18th century, appearing on military uniforms, coins, and various emblems long before it was placed on the national flag. When Canada adopted its current flag in 1965, the stylized 11-point maple leaf at its center made the connection official. The leaf represents more than just the maple syrup industry. It symbolizes Canada's natural beauty, its forests, and perhaps the sweet character Canadians like to believe they possess. Maple syrup's cultural significance extends beyond economics. It appears in Canadian cuisine in countless ways, drizzled over pancakes and waffles, yes, but also used in glazes for salmon and pork, incorporated into desserts, even poured over snow to create maple taffy, a traditional treat. The arrival of the maple syrup season is celebrated with festivals and sugar shack visits, particularly in Quebec, where the tradition runs especially deep. If maple syrup represents Canada's sweet side, hockey represents its competitive spirit. Ice hockey is not merely popular in Canada. It is woven into the national psyche, a shared language that crosses cultural and linguistic divides. The exact origins of ice hockey are debated, with various Canadian cities claiming to have hosted the first organized game. What's clear is that by the late 19th century, the sport was being played across Canada, with rules gradually standardizing. Montreal is generally credited with hosting the first organized indoor game in 1875. Played at the Victoria skating rink, the sport grew rapidly. The National Hockey League was founded in 1917, originally with teams in Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, and briefly Quebec City. American teams joined soon after, and the NHL eventually grew into the premier professional hockey league in the world. Of the league's original 6 teams, those that existed from 1942 to 1967, 4 were Canadian: the Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, Boston Bruins, Chicago Blackhawks, Detroit Red Wings, and New York Rangers. The Stanley Cup, awarded to the NHL playoff champion, is North America's oldest professional sports trophy. Donated in 1892 by Lord Stanley, then Governor-General of Canada, it was originally meant as an amateur championship trophy, but evolved into the prize for professional hockey supremacy. The trophy itself is unique, with the names of winning players engraved on its bands, creating a physical record of hockey history. For many Canadians, Saturday night means hockey night. The Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's Hockey Night in Canada has been broadcasting games since 1952, making it one of the longest-running sports television programs in the world. Multiple generations have grown up with the program's theme music, which became so iconic that public outcry erupted when it was briefly discontinued. Beyond professional hockey, the sport permeates Canadian life at every level. Children in many families learn to skate almost as soon as they can walk. Countless youths play in organized leagues, and in many small towns, the local hockey arena serves as a community gathering place. Outdoor rinks, maintained by municipalities and sometimes by dedicated volunteers, dot Canadian communities. In winter, ponds, lakes, and rivers freeze solid, becoming impromptu hockey rinks where pickup games materialize whenever enough players gather. Canada's success in international hockey competition is remarkable. The country has won numerous Olympic gold medals in both men's and women's hockey, with the men's victory at the 2010 Vancouver Olympics being particularly memorable for Canadians. The women's national team has dominated international play, winning multiple Olympic and World Championship gold medals. Canadian players make up a significant portion of NHL rosters, far out of proportion to Canada's population. The sport has produced legendary players whose names are revered: Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, Maurice Rocket Richard, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and many others. Gretzky, in particular, holds records many consider unbreakable, including most career goals, assists, and points. His number 99 has been retired league-wide, an honor unique to him. Hockey's importance to Canadian identity cannot be overstated. It's a sport that unites the country, provides a common reference point across regions and cultures, and embodies qualities Canadians like to see in themselves: toughness, teamwork, speed, and grace under pressure. Canada is officially bilingual, a status enshrined in the official languages Act of 1969 and reaffirmed in the Constitution Act of 1982. Both English and French have equal status in Parliament, in federal courts, and in all federal institutions. This bilingualism reflects Canada's dual colonial heritage and the significant French-speaking population, primarily in Quebec. The reality of bilingualism is complex. While both languages have official status, English is dominant across most of the country. Only one province, New Brunswick, is officially bilingual. Quebec is officially French-speaking, having passed laws to protect and promote the French language. In Quebec, approximately 80% of the population speaks French as their first language. Outside Quebec, French speakers are minorities, though significant Francophone communities exist in Ontario, New Brunswick, and parts of Manitoba. The history of English-French relations in Canada has been marked by tension. After the British conquest, French Canadians found themselves a minority in a British Empire, and they worked to preserve their language, religion, and culture. This effort was largely successful in Quebec, where the French character of the province remains strong to this day. However, in other parts of Canada, French-speaking communities faced pressure to assimilate, and many French-speaking populations outside Quebec gradually became English-speaking over generations. In the 1960s, Quebec underwent what became known as the Quiet Revolution, a period of rapid secularization and modernization. The province's government, previously dominated by conservative and religious forces, was replaced by a progressive administration that sought to strengthen Quebec's control over its own affairs and to protect the French language. This led to the rise of Quebec nationalism and separatism. Two referendums were held on Quebec's sovereignty in 1980 and 1995. Both failed, but the 1995 vote was extraordinarily close, with the no side winning by less than 1 percentage point. The question of Quebec's place in Canada remains a subject of debate, though support for separation has declined in recent years. Despite these tensions, bilingualism remains a defining feature of Canadian identity. Federal public servants are expected to be bilingual, and immersion programs allow English-speaking children to learn French and vice versa. The ability to speak both languages is seen as an asset, opening doors professionally and allowing fuller participation in Canadian life. Beyond English and French, Canada is home to speakers of hundreds of other languages. Indigenous languages, while endangered, are spoken by communities across the country. In the Northwest Territories, 11 different languages have official status, including several indigenous languages. Canada's immigration policies have brought people from every corner of the globe. And walking through neighborhoods in cities like Toronto or Vancouver, one can hear Mandarin, Cantonese, Punjabi, Tagalog, Arabic, Italian, Portuguese, and countless others. This linguistic diversity reflects a broader multiculturalism that has become central to Canada's self-image. Canada was the first country in the world to adopt multiculturalism as official government policy, doing so in 1971. This policy recognized that Canada was not a melting pot, where diverse cultures blend into a single homogeneous culture, but rather a mosaic, where different cultures maintain their distinct identities while contributing to the larger whole. This approach stems partly from necessity. Canada has always been diverse, from its indigenous peoples to its French and British colonizers to waves of immigrants from every part of the world. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, immigrants arrived from Eastern and Southern Europe to settle the prairie provinces. After World War II, displaced persons and refugees from Europe made new homes in Canada. Since the 1980s, increasing numbers of immigrants have come from Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. Today, over 20% of Canada's population was born outside the country, one of the highest percentages among developed nations. Major cities like Toronto and Vancouver have become extraordinarily diverse. In Toronto, more than half the population was born outside Canada, and over 140 languages are spoken. The city has large communities of people from virtually every nation and culture, creating vibrant neighborhoods where one can find authentic cuisine, cultural celebrations, and places of worship from around the world. This diversity is not without challenges. Integration takes time and effort. Discrimination and racism exist, despite Canada's official commitment to multiculturalism. Indigenous peoples, in particular, continue to face systemic discrimination and inequality. Newcomers sometimes struggle to find employment matching their qualifications, and cultural misunderstandings can create friction. Nevertheless, Canada's multiculturalism is generally considered a success. The country has largely avoided the ethnic conflicts that have plagued other diverse societies. Canadians, by and large, seem comfortable with diversity and take pride in their multicultural identity. Public opinion polls consistently show high levels of support for immigration and multiculturalism. This diversity has enriched Canadian culture immeasurably. Canadian cuisine, for instance, has been transformed by immigration. While some consider poutine, French fries topped with gravy and cheese curds, to be the quintessential Canadian dish, Canadian food now encompasses much more: butter tarts and Nanaimo bars. Yes, but also exceptional sushi, dim sum, curries, and countless other dishes brought by immigrants and adapted to Canadian tastes. Canadians have a global reputation for politeness, and while any stereotype is an oversimplification, there's truth to this one. Studies have found that Canadians do tend to use more polite language than people in other countries, particularly compared to their American neighbors. They say, please, thank you, and sorry, frequently, sometimes to the point of absurdity. Canadians apologize when someone else bumps into them, and the phrase "sorry, eh?" has become something of a national joke. This politeness is partly cultural, instilled from a young age, but it also may reflect something deeper about Canadian society. Canada has managed to build a peaceful, orderly society in a vast and often harsh land. This required cooperation, compromise, and a certain restraint. The Canadian tradition has been one of negotiation rather than confrontation, of finding middle ground rather than pursuing winner-take-all solutions. This doesn't mean Canadians are pushovers or lack passion, but there is a tendency toward moderation, a desire to avoid extremes. This is reflected in Canada's political culture, which has traditionally been more centrist than that of the United States, with a larger role for government and a stronger social safety net. The Canadian healthcare system, for instance, provides universal coverage funded through taxation. While the system has its problems, including sometimes long wait times for non-urgent procedures, it ensures that no Canadian need go without medical care due to inability to pay. This system is deeply valued by Canadians and has become part of the national identity. Canada also has a tradition of peacekeeping in international affairs. Canadian diplomat Lester B. Pearson won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1957 for his role in resolving the Suez Crisis, and Canada subsequently became a major contributor to United Nations peacekeeping missions. While Canada's military has also participated in combat operations, notably in Afghanistan, the peacekeeping tradition remains an important part of how Canadians see themselves, as helpful, moderate, and dedicated to resolving conflicts through diplomacy when possible. Today, Canada stands as one of the world's wealthiest and most developed nations. Its economy is diverse, based on natural resources, manufacturing, services, and technology. The country is rich in resources, oil and natural gas, particularly in Alberta, timber throughout the country, minerals of all kinds, agricultural products from the prairies, and fish from its extensive coastlines. Canada is a member of the G7, the group of the world's major advanced economies. Its financial system, centered in Toronto, is considered one of the most stable in the world. Canadian banks emerged from the 2008 financial crisis relatively unscathed compared to their American and European counterparts, partly due to stricter regulations. The country's three largest cities, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, are cosmopolitan centers with skylines of glass and steel, world-class universities, thriving art scenes, and diverse populations. Toronto is Canada's financial capital and largest city, home to over 6 million people in its metropolitan area. Montreal, while smaller, is considered Canada's cultural capital. With a vibrant art scene, renowned festivals like the Montreal International Jazz Festival and Just for Laughs, and a nightlife that rivals any city in North America. Vancouver, set between mountains and ocean, is consistently rated as one of the world's most livable cities. The capital, Ottawa, located on the border between Ontario and Quebec, is a bilingual city with a population of about 1 million. It houses Parliament, where federal laws are made and debates occur. Canada is a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary democracy, meaning that while the British monarch is the formal head of state, real power lies with the elected Prime Minister and Parliament. The Governor-General represents the monarch, but has largely ceremonial duties. Canada's federal system divides power between the national government and the 10 provinces and 3 territories. Each province has its own legislature and premier, with jurisdiction over matters like education, healthcare, and natural resources within their borders. This system allows for regional variation while maintaining national unity. The country faces various challenges. Indigenous peoples continue to experience lower outcomes in health, education, and economic well-being compared to other Canadians, the legacy of centuries of colonialism and discrimination. Environmental concerns loom large, from climate change's impact on the Arctic to the management of natural resources. Alberta's oil sands, while economically important, have drawn criticism for their environmental footprint. Housing affordability has become a crisis in major cities, with prices in Toronto and Vancouver reaching levels that make homeownership impossible for many middle-class families. Healthcare systems strain under growing demand from aging populations. And always, the question of national unity persists, not just regarding Quebec, but also regarding the relationship between resource-rich western provinces and the more populous east. Yet despite these challenges, Canada remains a nation characterized by peace, prosperity, and remarkable diversity. It consistently ranks near the top of global quality of life indices. Millions of people worldwide seek to immigrate to Canada, drawn by its opportunities, safety, and reputation as a welcoming place for newcomers. Canada's economic story is deeply intertwined with its vast natural resources. Yet the modern Canadian economy extends far beyond extraction and export. Understanding Canada's economic development provides insight into how a sparsely populated nation covering half a continent became one of the world's most prosperous countries. The fur trade, as we've discussed, drove early European exploration and settlement. Beaver pelts were the currency of this era, shipped to Europe where they were transformed into fashionable felt hats. The Hudson's Bay Company, established in 1670, became one of the world's oldest commercial corporations still in existence. For more than 2 centuries, it effectively governed much of what is now Canada, maintaining trading posts across an area larger than most European nations. The company's influence was so extensive that when Canada acquired its western territories, it did so by purchasing them from the Hudson's Bay Company, not from indigenous nations or other governments. As the fur trade declined in importance, other resources came to the forefront. The forests that cover so much of Canada became, and remain, a major economic asset. The forestry industry, centered in British Columbia, Ontario, and Quebec, employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians directly and many more in supporting industries. Canada is one of the world's largest exporters of wood pulp, newsprint, and lumber. Modern forestry practices in Canada, while not perfect, have generally moved toward sustainability, with regulations requiring replanting and protecting certain old-growth areas. Agriculture transformed the prairies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The development of frost-resistant wheat varieties, suitable for Canada's short growing season, made large-scale grain farming possible. Today, Canada is one of the world's major wheat exporters, along with other grains, oilseeds like canola, and livestock. The grain elevators that dot the prairie landscape have become symbols of the region, tall concrete structures where farmers bring their harvests for storage before shipment. Saskatchewan alone contains more than 40% of Canada's total farmland, despite representing only 6% of the country's population. Mining has always been central to the Canadian economy. Gold rushes in the Yukon in the 1890s brought tens of thousands of prospectors north, creating boom towns that mostly disappeared once the easily accessible gold was exhausted. The city of Dawson City went from a few hundred residents to over 40,000 during the height of the Klondike Gold Rush, then shrank back to a small town once the rush ended. But while gold might capture imaginations, other minerals proved more consistently valuable. Nickel, copper, zinc, and iron ore are extracted in vast quantities. The Sudbury Basin in Ontario contains one of the world's largest deposits of nickel and copper, believed to be the result of an ancient meteorite impact that brought these valuable metals to the surface. In recent decades, Alberta's oil sands have become both an economic powerhouse and a subject of environmental controversy. These deposits contain an estimated 1.7 trillion barrels of bitumen, a thick, tar-like substance that can be processed into crude oil. This gives Canada the world's third largest proven oil reserves, after Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. The extraction process, however, is energy intensive and has significant environmental impacts, including habitat destruction and greenhouse gas emissions. The oil sands have made Alberta wealthy, but they've also made Canada a major petroleum exporter, complicating the country's efforts to meet climate change commitments. Hydroelectric power is another major resource. Quebec, Manitoba, British Columbia, and Newfoundland and Labrador all generate large amounts of hydroelectricity. Quebec's James Bay project, one of the world's largest hydroelectric developments, produces enough power to meet most of that province's needs and export electricity to the United States. These projects have not been without controversy, as many involved flooding vast areas of land, disrupting traditional indigenous territories, and altering ecosystems. The Churchill Falls Generating Station in Labrador, one of the largest underground power stations in the world, represents an engineering marvel, but also a complicated political situation. As Quebec receives most of the economic benefits, despite the facility being in Newfoundland and Labrador. Beyond resources, Canada has developed a sophisticated service and technology economy. Toronto is the financial heart of Canada, home to the country's 5 largest banks, all of which rank among the strongest and most stable financial institutions in the world. The Toronto Stock Exchange is the 9th largest globally by market capitalization. Bay Street, Toronto's equivalent to Wall Street, makes decisions that affect the Canadian economy and increasingly the global financial system. Technology sectors have grown dramatically, particularly in cities like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Waterloo, Ontario. Waterloo, home to the University of Waterloo and formerly the headquarters of BlackBerry, has become a hub for tech startups and is sometimes called Silicon Valley North. Canadian artificial intelligence research, centered in Montreal, Toronto, and Edmonton, is considered world-leading. Yoshua Bengio, Jeffrey Hinton, and other Canadian researchers have been instrumental in the development of deep learning and neural networks. technologies that now power much of modern AI. The film and television industry represents another economic success story. Toronto and Vancouver serve as production centers for many Hollywood films and television shows. Their streets dressed up to represent American cities. The province of British Columbia has been particularly successful in attracting productions, offering tax incentives and modern studio facilities. Canadian talent, both behind and in front of the camera, has increasingly gained international recognition. Understanding Canada requires understanding its relationship with seasons. Winter dominates the national consciousness, even in regions where it's relatively mild. For much of the country, winter means snow, sometimes overwhelming amounts of it. The Maritimes can receive snowfalls measured in meters during powerful nor'easters. Quebec City averages over 3 meters of snow annually. In the north, snow arrives in September or October and doesn't fully melt until May or June. Canadians have adapted to and embraced winter. Ice hockey, as discussed, originated partly because Canadians needed something to do during the long winters. Cross-country skiing, downhill skiing, snowboarding, snowmobiling, ice fishing, these winter activities aren't just pastimes, but part of the national culture. Winter Carnival in Quebec City, Winterlude in Ottawa. These festivals celebrate rather than merely endure the cold months. Ice castles and snow sculptures, dog sled races and skating on frozen canals. These activities transform winter from an obstacle into an opportunity. Yet winter's harshness should not be underestimated. In many parts of the country, winter temperatures regularly drop below -30 degrees Celsius. Wind chill can make it feel even colder, cold enough that exposed skin freezes in minutes. Cars must be plugged in to keep engine heaters running overnight, or they won't start in the morning. Entire industries exist to cope with winter. Snow removal services, winter tire manufacturers, companies that install block heaters in vehicles. Spring arrives suddenly in many parts of Canada, a dramatic transition from winter's grip. Rivers and lakes thaw, sometimes explosively, as ice breaks up and flows downstream in massive jams that can cause flooding. This is when maple syrup season occurs, those few weeks when temperatures fluctuate around freezing, causing sap to flow. Spring also brings the return of migratory birds by the millions, filling the air with song after winter's relative silence. Summer in southern Canada can be surprisingly hot. Cities like Toronto and Montreal regularly see temperatures in the low 30s Celsius, with humidity making it feel even hotter. Yet summer is brief, especially in the north, a precious season to be maximized. Canadians emerge from their homes, gathering in parks, on patios, at cottage country retreats. The cottage culture is particularly strong in Ontario and Quebec, where families often own or rent small lakeside cabins, escaping the city on weekends and holidays to swim, fish, and enjoy nature. Autumn brings spectacular displays of color as deciduous trees prepare for winter. The maple forests of Ontario and Quebec transform into paintings of red, orange, and gold. This is the season of harvest, when farmers rush to bring in crops before the first killing frost. It's also when many Canadians feel a certain melancholy, knowing that winter's return is inevitable. These seasonal rhythms shape Canadian life in ways both obvious and subtle. The Canadian psyche has been shaped by the need to prepare for and survive long, dark, cold winters. This may contribute to the Canadian tendency toward saving and prudence, the desire for strong social safety nets, the value placed on community and mutual support. There are smaller facts about Canada that paint a fuller picture of this nation. The country has more donut shops per capita than any other nation, thanks primarily to the ubiquitous Tim Hortons chain, named after a famous hockey player. These coffee shops serve as informal community centers, places where people gather, particularly in smaller towns. Alert, Nunavut is the northernmost permanently inhabited place in the world. Sitting just 817 kilometers from the North Pole, its handful of residents experience 24-hour daylight in summer and total darkness in winter. The military maintains a station there, and research scientists conduct studies in one of Earth's most extreme environments. Canada's longest street is Yonge Street in Toronto. Once listed by Guinness World Records as the longest street in the world at 1,896 kilometers, though this measurement has been disputed. Regardless of the exact length, driving from one end to the other would take you from Lake Ontario deep into the north of Ontario. The country has some unusual lakes. Little Manitou Lake in Saskatchewan has salt content similar to the Dead Sea, allowing swimmers to float effortlessly on its surface. Spotted Lake in British Columbia contains extremely concentrated minerals that, as water evaporates in summer, form colorful spots across the lake's surface. The Bay of Fundy between Nova Scotia and New Brunswick has the highest tides in the world. The difference between high and low tide can exceed 16 meters, creating dramatic scenes as billions of tons of water flow in and out of the bay twice each day. At low tide, the ocean floor is exposed, and at high tide, the same area is underwater. These tidal forces have carved unique formations in the rock and created tidal bores, where incoming tide creates waves that travel up rivers. Canada has given the world numerous inventions. The telephone, invented by Alexander Graham Bell, who immigrated to Canada from Scotland. Insulin, discovered by Canadian doctors Frederick Banting and Charles Best. The cardiac pacemaker, the electric wheelchair, and many others. Canadians have also contributed to arts and culture far beyond the country's modest population would suggest. The list of famous Canadian actors, musicians, authors, and artists is extensive. Jim Carrey, Ryan Reynolds, Keanu Reeves, Rachel McAdams, Margaret Atwood, Alice Munro, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature, Leonard Cohen, Joni Mitchell, Drake, Celine Dion, and many more. Basketball was invented by Canadian James Naismith in Massachusetts, though he created the game while working in the United States. Meanwhile, the sport of lacrosse, which now has professional leagues, originated with indigenous peoples and was adopted as Canada's official national summer sport. The Trans-Canada Highway stretches 7,821 kilometers from Victoria, British Columbia, to St. John's, Newfoundland, making it one of the world's longest national highways. Driving its entire length would take you through vastly different landscapes and climates, from temperate rainforests to prairie grasslands to the rocky shores of the Atlantic. Canadian winters are indeed cold in many parts of the country. Winnipeg, Manitoba, has earned the nickname Winterpeg due to its bitter winters, where temperatures can plunge below -40 degrees Celsius. Yet despite the cold, or perhaps because of it, Canadians have developed a culture that embraces winter. Ice fishing, snowmobiling, skiing, and hockey are all winter pursuits that allow people to enjoy rather than merely endure the cold months. The national holiday, Canada Day, is celebrated on July 1st, marking the anniversary of Confederation in 1867. Across the country, people gather for fireworks, concerts, and community celebrations. In Ottawa, large crowds gather on Parliament Hill for official ceremonies and entertainment. And so we've wandered through this vast northern land, touching on its geography, its peoples, its history, its culture. We've stood on the shore of Hudson Bay and felt the Arctic wind. We've watched maple sap drip into buckets in a Quebec sugar bush. We've heard the call of loons across a northern lake and the roar of crowds at a hockey game. We've seen the northern lights shimmer across the sky and walked the cobblestone streets of old Quebec. Canada is a land of contrasts and compromises, of wilderness and cities, of ancient heritage and constant change. It is a place where diverse peoples have found ways to live together, not always easily, not always perfectly, but with a degree of peace and mutual respect that is remarkable. As you lie there now, perhaps your breathing has slowed. Perhaps the facts and stories have begun to blend together, images flowing one into another, like the northern lights across the sky. That's perfectly fine. There's no test tomorrow, no need to remember every detail. What matters is the feeling, the sense of a place that exists vast and northern, shaped by ice and water, and the determined people who have made it home. The forests are still there, stretching endlessly. The lakes still lie frozen in winter, teeming with life in summer. Bears still fish for salmon in rivers, and caribou still migrate across the tundra. In cities, millions go about their lives, while in remote villages, small communities maintain ways of life adapted to lands where few could survive. The country continues day by day, year by year, its people finding ways forward. If you've made it this far, if you're still awake listening to these words, thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've enjoyed this exploration, if it's helped you relax or learn something new, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to subscribe to Restful Realities and hit the like button. Your support helps me create more content like this, more gentle explorations of our world's fascinating places and stories. But if sleep has already claimed you, that's perfect too. That's exactly what this was meant to do. Let yourself drift deeper now. Let the images of Canada fade into the background of your mind. Tomorrow will come soon enough, with its own demands and distractions. But for now, there's only this moment, this breath, this gentle descent into sleep. The maple trees are still standing. The rivers are still flowing. The northern lights will dance again tonight, whether anyone watches or not. And you can rest now. You've learned enough. You've traveled far enough, at least for tonight. Sweet dreams. Good night.